Welcome into episode 370 of the Skate Podcast. I am Brian DeFelice, joined by Bridget Prue and Scott McLaughlin. Bridget and Scott, what is going on with the Boston Bruins? They suck. They are so bad. I don't even know what sport they're playing, and I don't think they do either. I don't mean to be blunt right off the top, but oh my goodness.
Yeah, it's getting worse. Like that's got to be what's most concerning is we keep looking for them to like find that stretch where they build a little bit of positive momentum. Maybe they aren't playing great, but they at least get some results. They kind of muddle through. And it's like just their overall play is just getting worse. The power play is definitely getting worse. Swayman is not finding his game. Like, maybe we can just jump right into opening shifts because mine's about Swayman. Like, he gives up 5 goals on 29 shots in a 5-1 loss to Columbus Monday night. A game you just need to win. Like, I honestly don't even care how it would have looked. Columbus is bad. They were 1-6 in their last 7 coming in. You're coming off a tough loss on Saturday. Swayman had Saturday off, so he should be fresh. And whole team obviously was bad, but Swayman not nearly good enough. The first shorthanded goal that Columbus scores, there's breakdowns. Yes, like Charlie Coyle tries to make a stick check, is caught lunging. Mason Lohrei just stands by, doesn't play defense. And yet it was still a very stoppable shot. Like it looked like he just had a stick. Swayman had a stick in bad position, and it almost just kind of banked in off him. He was asked after the game, "How do you feel about your game?" He said, "I think it can only go up from here." I asked him why it's not where it is. He talked about some mechanical stuff. He was asked if he thinks missing all of training camp was a factor, and he said he's had enough time to adapt and get back to things. I think the biggest thing that I lost out on was this group. I'm really trying to engulf just being in the room again and being a leader. I want my play to speak for that. So I need to step up, and that's exactly what I'm going to do. But he keeps saying things like that he's going to get right, and he's going to get his game on track, and he's going to be better, and he's looking forward to it, and it's going to feel great once he's there. Guys, he has an 884 save percentage on the season now, I think. He's 5'7", 5'7" 884 save percentage. 46th out of 54 qualified goalies. Like, not nearly good enough.
I mean, to be fair, he's not the only one on the team saying that. I mean, we've reached the point where we're hearing kind of the same thing over and over again. It's the right thing to say. Like, it's Marchand saying we need to be accountable, and Coyle saying we need to practice harder, and Swayman saying he's, it's only up from here. And so far, November could have been the month where all of that started to come together, but instead we're just kind of hearing the same thing again. So anyway, we'll get back to Swayman for sure later. My opening shift was basically that this 4-game stretch with St. Louis twice, Dallas, and Columbus should have been a stretch where I think 6 out of 8 points is what the team should be capable of doing in that stretch. Instead, they go to overtime twice against a bad St. Louis team. They win it once, they lose it once. And then what maybe on paper was the most winnable game against Columbus was a blowout loss. So we were talking about before the stretch started, okay, this is a 4-game stretch where you could really get your feet dug in a playoff spot and hopefully not look back and just kind of stay, even if you're only halfway decent the rest of the year, if you can just hold on and keep pace with the playoff spot, maybe you're setting yourself up for more success. But that's not what happened in this stretch. They did not make a claim to a playoff spot. In fact, as we're speaking at 9 a.m. on Tuesday morning, they're not in the playoffs, though they are tied in points with Tampa Bay, but their game in hand puts them out the playoff spot. It should have been a get right period, but it wasn't. And the question just remains, what is it going to take for this to turn around? And we'll get into this. I'm going to finish here. Practicing harder, maybe, but I don't know how that wasn't already a solution. So maybe external options are what needs to happen.
Yeah, and so my opening shift quickly is personally, I know a big storyline is the Bruins need to part ways with Jim Montgomery because everything looks so out of sync. As I said off the top, the Bruins don't even appear to be playing the same sport as their teammate next to them. They're not. They can't even string together a single pass, let alone multiple. They're not even playing hockey. They are terrible. They look like it's what I'm watching right now with the Bruins guys is, and I'm including 05, 06, 06, 07, like even during like the Joe Thornton trade, like you still had you still had some good young pieces. You had a young Bergeron, you bring in Chara, like at least those teams, they were like bottom 5 teams in the Eastern Conference for a couple of years, but they were competitive through December, and like there was some hope there. They were just getting better. This product sucks. This is one of the worst products I've ever seen. This is probably one of the most unlikable Bruins teams I've ever seen thus far. And if this continues, and people want it right now, but people are talking about a coaching change because you can't fire the whole roster. I'm not so sure that Don Sweeney is in a rush to fire Jim Montgomery, because if and when he does, that puts Don Sweeney directly in the firing line. And it's almost as if, and so I feel like if there's going to be some change here, ownership literally will have to take ownership of their team and potentially make some changes beyond the coach. And again, Sweeney may fire Monty. This is just me reading between the lines. Like, I don't know if he's in a huge rush to do so. And so, Brian, why are we talking about firing a coach? Why are we talking about firing a GM, firing whatever? Well, they're tied for the second worst goal differential in the NHL. They're ranked 31st in the NHL. I think they're tied with somebody else. They were third last night, third worst, but I think overnight Scott tweeted they might be second to worst now. With a minus.
San Jose won in overtime. My guy Macklin Celebrini, big overtime winner.
So the Bruins have a minus 21 goal differential. Okay, second worst in the league. They are dead last in the league on the power play. They are 26th in the league on the PK. And Scott, I don't have access to StatMuse or something, so I couldn't see the bottom 5 teams. But even strength goal differential, I didn't see Boston in the top 25, so I think they're a bottom 5 team in even strength goal differential as well. So every metric you look at, advanced analytics and just traditional analytics, this team is one of, if not the worst team in the league going right now. And when that's the case, how do you possibly sit there and say, change is not an option?
So the shocking thing is that they're actually still okay. I mean, not good, but okay. 5-on-5 goal differential. They're -3, which is 20th in the NHL. But they have the worst special teams goal differential. You mentioned dead last in the power play. They're 31st in scoring overall. They haven't got anything going 5-on-5. They can't score on the power play. That's how you end up bottom 2 in the league in scoring. It's, and now even the defense is falling apart. I feel like it was just last week or a week and a half ago, I was talking about how they had made improvements, at least in 5-on-5 defense. The penalty kill has not been good all year. And now even the 5-on-5 defense has been bad. And obviously losing Hampus Lindholm is part of that. That doesn't help, but they should be so much better with what's left. It sounds repetitive, but it's we are not looking at a Stanley Cup contender, and our preseason predictions are way off, but I still firmly believe that this roster is good enough to be a playoff team and be in the top half of the league. And Bridget, as you said, like, their saving grace might be that the Eastern Conference isn't good enough for them to be buried just yet. Jim Montgomery said after the game too, like he pointed out, first 20 games you don't want to fall out of the playoff race, and they haven't, which is technically true, but that's only because there are only 7 good teams in the conference, and 8 have to make the playoffs. And they are playing more like they're playing closer to one of the worst teams in the NHL than a mediocre middle of the pack team.
The weaker teams are in the Atlantic too. Like the Bruins also could sneak in if they just happen to get one more point than Tampa Bay. Like,
well, they're not going to do that.
Like, I'm just saying, like,
I mean, Tampa Bay is good. I'm counting them as one of the good teams.
Yeah, or another team at the bottom of the 3 Atlantic teams that get in without the wild card. But yeah, it's still hard to watch. Like, these games haven't been the most pleasant to sit up there, and then after the game, like, it's not easy for anyone after the game to have to kind of like say the same thing and ask the same thing, and at some point it's got to turn around. And Brian, you said, coaching change is an option. That's not new. Maybe a trade like soon rather than waiting to anywhere closer to the deadline, like literally a trade in November or December could potentially add life. And Scott and I were talking, this was a conversation being had at our dinner table yesterday before the game, was could they bring back Taylor Hall? Like, could they get Taylor Hall back, who is still on the contract that he had with the Bruins, but in Chicago? And what would it take to get back someone like that, he would be a rental because he's at the end of his contract? But if you could get Chicago to retain salary and you just had to give a pick or like a, somebody from your roster over there that you think you could do without, I guess, would that be worth doing?
Yeah. But, I mean, I guess I look at that as like, doesn't it need to be something bigger than Taylor Hall? Like, this team needs a bigger shakeup than that. I mean, if you're talking about a Taylor Hall trade, okay, like maybe it's a Trent Frederick going the other way or something. That maybe it does something. Like, I mean, Taylor Hall can still
just the first of many moves. like this is move one.
I don't know. I just feel like this team needs something bigger than that. And Brian, you mentioned like maybe part of the reason Sweeney's been so patient is that once he fires Montgomery, that puts the target on him next. Well, I would also say, like, the longer he just lets this continue, the target's going to be on him anyways. Like at some point, you see your coach trying everything as far as changing lines and trying different approaches at practice. Like one day he's going to be hard on, your Marchand or Pasternak. One day he's yelling at Morgan Geekie in practice. And then then a couple days later, he's trying the looser approach and he's, skating across the opposite side of the ice and having guys shoot pucks at his stick and trying to get guys loose. And he's talking about calling up Jeff VL and how he can bring a positive attitude that they need on the bench. And it's like, none of it's worked. None of it's getting through. So if you're the GM, if what the coach is doing isn't working and you tinkering around the edges of the roster isn't doing it, like sending down Matt Patra hasn't accomplished anything yet. No one that they've called up has really done much. Like Georgi Merkulov has had some good moments, but it obviously hasn't been a difference maker in terms of wins and losses at this point, which isn't like fair to put on him anyways. But at some point, as the GM, you have to do something more.
Well, and this is why I said a few minutes ago, if this uninspired and downright putrid product continues for much longer, I can guarantee you, okay, we've seen recent examples of teams that have struggled heavily and been one of the last place teams in the league in the first quarter, half of the season, and then go on a cup run. The Oilers last year had a putrid start to the season. They were one of the worst teams. We saw the Panthers a couple of years ago. We saw the Blues in 2019 go from last to cup champions. I can promise you this is not one of those situations. So the reason I say that is if this play continues like this, you're right, Scott. Like Sweeney's not going to be the guy to blow up a roster that he constructed. So if ownership wants significant change, they'll need to take ownership of their team, and they will have to replace, in my opinion, you'll have to replace Don Sweeney. If you want to keep Cam Neely as some sort of team ambassador, go for it, but he should be on the line as well, and Jim Montgomery, because I say that to say this. If this team a month from now, by the way, right now, they have the 20th highest winning percentage out of 32 teams in the NHL. Okay, so like they're not a good team from winning percentage. So we can talk about how they're close to the playoffs. That's because of all the different fluctuation in games in hand. But we've talked about their team analytics. They're among the worst in the league, and their winning percentage is one of the worst in the league. If this is the case a month from now, then I believe the Bruins should be in sell mode. And I don't see, and I don't know if Don Sweeney's the guy to admit his faults in real time. Like you might have to rid of him and bring in a fresh pair of eyes that will honestly assess where the team is at and not be afraid to part with certain pending UFAs, maybe make a hockey trade to change the culture. I don't know the answer, but I believe if this continues much longer, call it another month, like if people want the Bruins to get back to where they should be, I think they're going to have to probably take some intentional steps back to go forward, because this roster to me, I know we had preseason picks for them, and a lot of hockey fans outside of Boston and media members outside of Boston had this Bruins team in the postseason. So if we were wrong about them, so were a lot of other people. But what I'm looking at right now, guys, it's not a coaching change away. It's not a one hockey culture trade away. It's to say they're out of sync doesn't do it justice. And I'm not saying this is the case. In fact, I don't think this is the case. But what I'm watching last night looks like a team that is playing to get their coach fired or make changes. I'm not saying that they are. I'm saying that's how bad they're playing. Jeremy Swayman has the puck, gives it right to a forechecker. Bruins going D to D in front of their own net. Pass is not connecting. It's almost like they're playing so bad it almost looks intentional, is my point. And it's not a one hockey trade move, in my opinion, away from changing.
The mistakes just in the first period alone were like so shocking. I mean, the first Columbus goal, like Carlo fans on a shot. It happens. I feel like it happens with Carlo more than most, and it shouldn't. But then like Lohrei gets caught way out wide. Like I don't know what he is doing trying to defend that rush, being that wide. And then Carlo crashes into Swayman. Frederick has a rush into the offensive zone up the middle and is just like gliding and holding onto the puck and gets easily caught by a back checker. And it's like, in what world do you play NHL hockey at that speed and think you're going to get away with it? Marchand had a bad turnover that on the power play that gets cleared down. The shorthanded goal against that I already mentioned, like Coyle's turnover, then losing a battle to Olivier, Lohrei just standing there. Zacha had a blind backhand turnover in the middle of the defensive zone. I mean, it just like goes on and on. Andrew Peak is holding onto a puck, skating backwards in his own zone. And Brian, this might have been what you were referencing, like D to D in front of your own net. Like tries to pass to Zadorov, who has a forechecker right on him, and the puck gets tipped and luckily goes over the net, but could have easily gone in. And it's just like, I turned to Bridget on that play and I was like, in what level of hockey has Andrew Peak ever made that pass or thought it was okay to make that pass? Like, that kind of stuff is just so baffling with this team right now. And you're right. It's like you don't even know what you're watching because it's like this isn't even like lack of NHL experience. Like, this is stuff that you stop doing in squirts or bantams. Like, I don't understand like where their heads are at.
That was not the only time Scott said something like that either. He's just sitting there going, "What is that?" like 10 times during each Bruins game.
It's like actually insulting to watch.
Yeah, that's just Scott takes personal offense sometimes.
You know who else took offense to these plays, guys? Was the alternative broadcast on Nesson. You should have seen Tuca and
I
Bergeron.
listened to that while we were up there. Like, I had one headphone in, and it was like actually really close to live. So like I was hearing them essentially react live. It's not on like a 30 to 60 second delay like Nesson, because it was on I was just listening to the audio on Twitter because they had it streaming or whatever. And yeah, they were not happy. There was and there was talks like Bergeron and Chara both saying like, you know, you have to earn your time on the power play. It's a privilege, like kind of bringing the old mentality back of like, yeah, you don't just get this job on the power play. You have to act like you could lose the spot. And unfortunately, pretty much every person on the Bruins is not doing a whole lot to keep their spot on the power play. But then, yeah, I mean, Razor multiple times saying like, "Oh, we're getting buried here on unobstructed views," because I think that what is it? I think it's like 10 goals that the Bruins have given up during their two broadcasts that they've done. So yeah, they think they're jinxing it, but I don't know if that's what's wrong with the team.
Guys,
I don't think Razor's jinxing it.
The best way I could describe it is and I'm really not trying to like, they're playing like they're stoned. Like, they're playing like they have no idea where they are. They're low energy, and it makes you, when you're watching it, you're like, there's no way that the coaching staff is going over film with these guys and their system and their structure, and then and what they're showing is like what the coaches are telling them. Like, that's why I'm saying like they're playing as if like they're trying to get the coaches fired, because there is no structure, there's no purpose out there. They are out of position. Their heads are not in the game. They are literally, their heads are in the clouds. And I will quickly say, I felt like Charlie McAvoy was at least trying to be engaged. Okay. And that shouldn't be an admirable trait. That should be an automatic for every player. But he appeared as one of the leaders looked like he was trying to, bring him into the fight. But we've talked about the leadership, guys. And I don't know, if you're David Pastrnak and you're Brad Marchand and you know that your coach is on the hot seat, are you going out there and wearing Harry Potter's invisibility cloak? 0 shots on goal for David Pastrnak, invisible. Brad Marchand, invisible. Like, where is the leadership stepping up and trying to do anything? Whether it's physical, whether it's production, whether it's play without the puck, they're playing like they don't give a shit what happens to Monty. And like I said, I'm there. When there's a disconnect between coaches and players, you have to hold the coaches accountable too. But watching this team, it's very evident that the coaching staff is like, they're just not intense. They're not doing what we're talking about. It's almost like you're watching like a mutiny. Now, whether that's intentional by the players or not, I don't know, but that's what it looks like.
Yeah, I don't think it's intentional, but I do think like part of the equation now in this getting worse and just continuing on like this is it feels like Montgomery's status is like hanging over them. Like, it's just this dark cloud that no one can avoid, no matter how much they say that they're ignoring the outside noise and all that. Like Brad Marchand said that last night. He's like, oh, I don't know like what people are talking about. It's like, of course you do. Like everyone does. You know, they're not as much as you try to shut yourself off from the outside world. Like you turn on the TV, radio, you're on social media or just internet in general, or someone else sees it and texts you about it. Like they know what the chatter is. They know that there's a lot of talk about Montgomery's job. And I feel like even if it's not intentional, or even if it's not, we don't really care if he gets fired, I do think like it's hanging over them now, which is probably why at some point, even if Sweeney knows that Montgomery is not fully to blame for this, or even half to blame, or whatever the percentages are, like at some point you might have to make a move just for the sake of like getting rid of this cloud that's hanging over the team now. That just isn't going away.
But does he have the guts to do it? Because like, and I know I mentioned earlier, and you kind of counterpointed to Scott, but again, it's like, what reason would you have watching this product to keep the coach, whether it's his fault or not? This team they're not, like I said, they're not playing hockey. I don't know what they're doing, and there's no signs that they're going to turn it around. So if you're not trying to keep Monty in front of you as a shield to be the first to go, then why else would he not make a move that's best for the team? Clearly, I do think it would be what's best for the team, whether it's Monty's fault or not.
Well, do you think he'll try to make the trade first? Like, if he really doesn't think that it's Monty's fault, then like try to get the trade first. I mean, there's been multiple reports from different people in Boston and Elliot Friedman, and that he's been in contact with more than half of the teams in the league to try to figure something out. So like it's an urgent thing, and maybe that's what they're waiting for. Like we make a different shakeup besides a coaching shakeup and go from there and see if that wakes people up, rather than going the coaching route if they don't really think it's his fault, which I think we all can agree he owns a good chunk of the blame, but not all of it. I mean, practicing at full intensity, that does come on him to enforce. Like there's certain parts like training camp being disjointed, that's on management and coaching, because management was deciding which guys to involve in each game, and like they're involved in the moving around the pieces in training camp as well as Monty. But and also like to the outside noise point, even if they don't spend a second on Twitter or whatever and they don't see anything or hear anything when they're walking down the street, or when they get interviewed in the locker room after, they hear the questions. Like they're aware of what people are trying to figure out, and like the subjects that are being talked about. So like just direct contact with us after the game, it can inform people what's being said and what's going on. And also, they're not dumb. Like they know the history of the NHL and what it takes for coaches to get fired, and that this is another example of one of those times where a coach could be on the way out and they know he doesn't have a contract either. So, I mean, just having the experience in just knowing that it's happened to other coaches will put that thought in your own head, even if you don't hear it from somebody else.
Yeah, exactly. Like, yeah, what did you guys think of
Scott's
Martian?
Speechless. He's speechless.
Well, yeah. Well, no, I want to transition. So what did you guys think of Marchand's post game? Because like he talked about, so he was mostly talking about the power play when he was talking about accountability, but he said like, and he actually echoed, Bridget, what you were referencing earlier with like Bergeron and Char, like saying, being on the power play is a privilege. It shouldn't be taken for granted. Like Marchand kind of said the same thing and said that there's been no accountability there. And then was asked about like, you've brought up accountability a couple times this season. And he says, yeah, like it's a hard thing to do, to really, look yourself in the mirror and pick your game apart. And it stood out to me a little bit more because it seems like he wasn't just saying what they need to do. It felt like he was identifying something that isn't happening. Like that there's been, I mean, he straight up said there hasn't been accountability there on the power play. Like just, and he included himself, so he's not pointing the finger at other guys, but like it really stood out to me as like, man, it sounded like a captain who feels like other guys, including some of the other top players, aren't really looking themselves in the mirror and figuring out like what's wrong and what they need to do to fix it.
Well, this is why I've been harping on leadership the last couple episodes, and he's included in that. Now, I mentioned online the other day, like, and I may have mentioned on the podcast, but last year the Bruins had some subtle, low key acquisitions in the offseason to help mitigate some of the leadership void from the year prior. Bergeron leaves, Foligno leaves, Krejci leaves. Okay, they bring in Shattenkirk, JVR. They get Maroon at the deadline. Like, those are some voices that have cups behind their name and their presence in the rooms. And then this year, all of those players are no longer around, and it's just Marchand with the younger leaders on the team compared to him. And I talked about how McAvoy and Pasternak in particular have been showing no signs of true leadership, at least on the ice consistently. Marchand's included in that. And Scott, you ask about my thoughts on his comments. Generally speaking, I hear him talk lately, and he's kind of full of shit, in my opinion. And I don't mean that as in like he's purposefully lying. I mean that, or he's lying at all. When I hear him speak now, I hear him speak and he's trying to get done with a post-game press conference, and I'm not taking what he's saying and telling myself, oh, they're definitely going to fix that next game. And here's an example. He talked last night about compete, and it starts with compete. Is that the first time he's mentioned that this year? No. And it starts with him. How was his compete last night?
Not great. I would say not the worst on the team, but not good enough.
Right. And he's the captain of the Boston Bruins, right? So next game, do any of you on this panel right now have confidence that he or his teammates are going to come out with compete? Because they've lacked it all year and they've talked about it all year. So last night, again, they lack compete. He says it starts with compete. Okay, why should I think that next game you're going to have compete? Because you've been saying it all year and you haven't been doing it. So when I hear his comments now, there's a lack of merit to them. And I never really thought I would say that because he's been around for a long time and he is very credible as a player. He's a potential future Hall of Famer. But if we're talking about this year in particular, in this moment in time, I hear anything that these players say after games, and it's just lip service. And I'm not buying into it for a second because they say one thing and they show the opposite. That's how I feel about his comments.
The problem is it's a systemic issue. It's not like one guy or like a line or even two lines are not clicking or not producing. Like it feels like it goes through the whole team and it all the way to goalie. Like it's affected the entire team. And so when you're trying to say like, oh, everybody's got to hold themselves accountable, it's starting for like it's the whole roster. It's not easy to get everybody all of a sudden to do that all at the same time, and it's hard to just spark an entire team when usually you're talking about, oh, you know, what can spark the third line or what can spark the second line. It's like, no, something has to spark the whole team, and that's why we keep coming back to a coaching change, because like there's not a whole lot that sparks an entire team. I don't think everybody just wakes up after the loss in Columbus and all of a sudden corrects everything that's been going wrong in their game.
But Bridget, let's say hypothetically speaking, because we can't predict the future. Let's say that there is no coaching change on the horizon. Okay, it has to start somewhere, and it has to start with the leadership. It's impossible to sit here and hold, you know, Parker Wotherspoon or Justin Brazeau or Mark Kaslick or Cole Koepke and say, you know, they got to get it. No. It has to start with, and I'm not saying you aren't saying this. I'm just more speaking out loud here.
Yeah,
like
And what I wasn't saying like I'm taking blame off them. I'm saying like I was just trying to prove how difficult it's going to be to get everybody to do it at once.
No, you're right, and like I said, I'm kind of just like thinking out loud. Like if there, because I feel as though again, it's not all Monty's fault, but I do think if you want to try to salvage this season, right, there has to be a coaching change or some sort of shockwave throughout the locker room. But because we can't predict the future, like if there's not, right, like you're right, Bridget, it's not going to all happen at once for everybody. But in my opinion, it has to start with the leaders. And I right now personally am questioning. I'm questioning a lot with David Pastrnak in particular. I'll just leave it there. I mean, I have my concerns about the other leaders too, but him in particular, I just don't know what's going on. And I know some people might be saying, really, Brian, you're gonna harp on Pastrnak, like he has no help, and that's on the GM. And I agree with you. Like, not every argument is black and white. There's a lot of gray, but I just have such a high standard for that player, and there's a lot of intangibles you can do when you're not scoring that I just think he's struggling to do.
Yeah, I mean, he didn't have a lot of help last year, and he was a lot better than he's been so far
Right.
this season. So,
Exactly.
like, there's a lot more that Pastrnak can do, regardless of what his line mates are doing around him. But yeah, you're right. Like, of course, like it has to start with the leaders. This team goes as they go. It's no surprise that the one game they won during this stretch was when Pastrnak and McAvoy in particular took over really most of the game, but especially in the third period in St. Louis. But so what? Like they're going to do that one out of every 4 or 5 games? That's not good enough. Like that's how you become a losing team and miss the playoffs. It just needs to be a lot more consistent from them. And I'll throw Jeremy Swayman in there because he's now part of this core. He's one of the pillars. He's one of the highest paid guys. Like you're built around him the same way you're built around Pastrnak and McAvoy for the future. And there's been a couple. Brian, on Monday morning, you tweeted out sort of a roundup of Elliot Friedman's quick thoughts on the Bruins from his 32 Thoughts podcast, and one of them was that there's some lingering hard feelings about the Swayman negotiations and how public they went. And I saw that and I listened to that and I was like, what the hell is that? Like, why would there be lingering hard feelings? Like, you got the deal done. Everything else should be, as soon as you put pen to paper, everything else should be water under the bridge and everyone is moving forward. And then I thought of it again after the game when Swayman was asked, did missing camp, has that affected you? Is it affecting you? And he says, like, I think I've had enough time to adapt, get back, what I summarized before. Then he says, I think the biggest thing that I lost out on was this group. I'm really trying to engulf just being in the room again and being a leader. And with Friedman's comments kind of combined with that, I was like, it made me think, like, is the issue maybe not so much between like management and Swayman's camp, but Swayman and his teammates? Like, is there a disconnect there? Because that sounded to me like a comment that you make when you feel like the team was kind of going without you. Like they all went through training camp in the preseason without you. And then you come back in and it's like, is there kind of an element there of like, hey man, like you got to catch up to us. Like we've been at this for 3 weeks. Like, we can't sit around waiting for you type of thing. And like, I wonder if like that's where the hard feelings are. Like, is there still, you add in the fact that he's obviously not playing the way he needs to play. Like, I wonder if that's what kind of stuff to be repaired. And if everyone starts playing well, that solves it. But
right
for now, like, it just kind of caught my ear.
Well, I think that lingering, like when I hear, there's still a little bit of lingering hard feelings, I would think it's because the by him not playing well, it could put management went through this entire process. Obviously, they weren't happy with it. And then Swayman not playing well is kind of putting them in a position where now they could lose their job if this is a really bad turns out to be a bad contract. If this turns out to be not worth what was signed, and that goes on them, as a bad decision they made, and a fail in negotiations on their part, on not accurately judging what the contract should be. But once again, playing well would probably put that water under the bridge, or however you want to say it. It's because with Swayman not playing well, it also makes them look bad. They kind of got swindled for the contract.
And that could also make things, if Scott, if what you're saying is accurate, or if there's smoke to that fire, that could make tensions in the room even higher because his play hasn't been there. But I just want to say quickly, if the lingering emotions or hard feelings are Swayman to the team, then I would say grow up and look in the mirror, because if we really want to trace this back to where the hard feelings may have started from, it was the year prior going to arbitration, which, by the way, we've talked about. Scott's detailed it. Arbitration is filed by the player. Is that correct, Scott? Not the team?
Well, it can be either way, but in this case, it was Swayman who filed.
Okay. So the initial arbitration where the Bruins hurt his feelings, again, that process was initiated by the player. Fast forward a year to this past offseason, none of the saga and none of the drama started with Swayman and the Bruins publicly until Swayman went on that podcast. He alone started the public negotiation talk, and then it snowballed. So he needs to look in the mirror and realize why things played out the way that they did. And I'm not saying that the Bruins ownership and management brass didn't add to that, but they were in ways punching back because they were getting ridiculed all over the place in the public forums. But as far as missing camp and his teammates feeling like we went through this together and you weren't there with us, I mean, it's possible. I think that we didn't really have these concerns when David Pastrnak held out for a bit into camp, or other players.
David Pastrnak held out for 1 day.
Was
Charlie
it a day?
McAvoy held out for a week.
Okay, but regardless, what I think players are understanding to an extent of it's a business, right? And if he came into the season and was playing to his capabilities, it's one thing. But when you're a major cause in all this drama and negative attention around the team before the season even starts, and then you start the season and 20 games in, your save percentage is a hell of a lot closer to your AAV than people expected. That's not going to be a recipe for teammates, forgiving what happened.
Yeah, I agree with you. If the hard feelings are between Swayman and management in one direction or the other, yeah, everyone needs to just grow up. It's over. You don't have to negotiate for 8 more years. So shut up and go to work. But another thing I thought of, though, on the Swayman player front, was something else that Friedman wrote during the holdout, during the negotiations before the deal got done. And Friedman said he talked to I don't remember if he mentioned the team or not, but he said he talked to a player who had held out through camp, or deep into camp. And the player said one of the things that stuck with him was that at the start of it, all the texts and calls from his teammates were very supportive. Said we're on your side, do what you have to do. And then as they got closer to the start of the season and he still wasn't there, he said there was a shift in tone where some of his teammates were hey, we need you, we want you back right now, type of thing. We got to get going for the season. And it, again, I'm just wondering out loud, was there any sort of shift like that with Swayman? Does it start with his teammates all have his back? We're here for you, bud. Do what you have to do. And as you get, a week out from the season, it's, hey, you're going to wrap that up. We need you, man. You're our starting goalie.
Well, I bet, and Bridget, I know we have a hard out in a few minutes, but I bet one thing too is, his teammates had that opening night game against Florida circled all summer. And that was a very big game, I think, for the Bruins psyche heading into the season.
In retrospect, probably made too big of a deal of it.
Sure. But if you're the players, you know who you're starting your season against, and you want to get off to a good start and send a message, right? And your starting goaltender isn't ready for the game because they can't start him because he hasn't had a camp. And like, again, it's just one of those things where it's like, that was probably a big game for his teammates, and he wasn't able to be ready for them because of the business side of things. And I'm sure that may have been a sour taste. One last comment before we go, and I wanted to get you guys' opinion on this, being in the media and working for EEI. I said this morning online, but one thing that's always bothered me about the Bruins through good times and bad, and in particular right now during bad times, is their unavailability to fans. And you talk about how like they're the only team in town that does not have either one of a player, coach, or management available to local radio periodically or weekly throughout their season. The Patriots, the Red Sox, the Celtics, the Revolution all do, and the Bruins don't. Does that bother you guys that they don't allow for transparency for their fans in their region, at least on some basis in season? Because outside of like fundraisers and charitable causes and coaching changes and preseason press conferences, they go silent, and I feel like people are owed some transparency and some availability, and it's always bothered me. I know Neely used to do it at the Sports Hub, and some players here and there would do something. Does that strike you guys a certain way as like arrogant or disrespectful to those who support their brand and their product?
I mean, look, obviously I'm biased as a media member, but yes, I think being out there more is generally a good thing. Like it allows you to have more of a connection to the fan base, right? Like fans wouldn't be wondering, like, or wouldn't be wondering as much, like, is Sweeney and Neely, are they about to fire Monty? Is Neely going to fire Sweeney? Like, if they're talking, you would know at least what their most recent comments are, at least what they're saying, even if that's maybe different than what's going on behind the scenes. But yeah, you're right. Like, it is pretty regular with everyone else. Like, Gerard Mayo is on the Greg Hill show every week during the season. Alex Cora is on EI every week. Someone from the Red Sox front office is on the Greg Hill show every week. Celtics are regularly on the Sports Hub. Like, so yeah, I do think it wouldn't be my approach, like if I were in charge of PR, but I'm sure they have their reasons. I know, there's a reason Neely stopped going on 98.5. Like, obviously he didn't like a lot of the station's content, but
well, it gets no better when you go silent, because
right.
people view you as arrogant, and like,
yeah, it leaves more of a vacuum for everyone to speculate.
Right. Like when you have no transparency to create to direct your own narrative and your own, people are gonna make one up for you. And I just, again, like, it pisses me off because like you have people who, they'll save money for months or a year, to bring their kid to a Bruins game, and or buy their kid a jersey for Christmas. People go to the games, like they sell at the Garden for almost 2 decades straight here. And there's just no like gratitude or transparency for the fans that support their product, and it pisses me off because right now, like, whatever. Bridget, I don't know if you had anything on that. I'm sorry to step on your toes there.
No, it's okay. I was just gonna say, like, I was just thinking back to like some of the other management that we hear from, and I'm not talking about Craig Breslow, but Chaim Bloom was always pretty available. Like, I feel like he would talk like openly to like Rob Bradford and different reporters if they texted him. Like, he'd give him a comment, or there was much more of a back and forth, like day to day with that. And at the very least, you could sit here and know a little bit more about what's going on inside somebody's head. But as we saw in previous seasons with the Bruins, like, Sweeney and Neely don't come available to talk to unless like something major happens, which would include like the Mitchell Miller thing was the one time that we got them mid-season and like trades and stuff. But that is those don't happen a lot. So there's not.
I mean, we do have to note that on this last road trip, Cam Neely did talk to Jim McBride of the Globe, and that interview got published over the weekend. So
well,
at least it's something, but that's
paywall.
Well, I mean, pay for news. Allow this to be my, me standing on my soapbox.
Like Brian's saying it's accessible when it's on, like when you join like a radio show rather than.
Yeah, and even still, like that's once since the start of the season that we've heard from either Neely or Sweeney, and Neely didn't really directly address like Montgomery or Sweeney's job security. So,
I just think a little bit of accountability at the top would help trickle down. It just I know what they're doing. They don't want it. They hold their cards tight to their chest. They don't want to tell people publicly what they're thinking. They don't want to create headlines so people can run with it. But guess what? That's the game. That's the business you're in. You are a public sports team in a major sports league, and this whole like, oh, we don't talk to the media because it's arrogant. It's like, oh, so you're too good for it. Like you're too good to give the people who feed your product any information. Like all the other teams do it, and guess what? Like they do it in good times and bad. It just rubs me the wrong way. It's probably not a huge story, but I just think in times like this in particular, it's like, they're getting bashed, and I think this is probably one of the reasons they can get bashed as well.
Speculation. There's more speculation, in my opinion, the less information that there is. So like the storyline kind of runs rampant and like runs its own course when you're not like there to give information that stops it.
Monty being available. Look, if Sweeney and Neely want to go hide, Jacobs want to be in Buffalo on their yacht, that's fine. But having Monty available, I think would do them well, and it keeps you
in Buffalo. What do they have it on?
They're on Niagara Falls. It also keeps you relevant from a PR perspective. It keeps you relevant in a very, very, very competitive sports city. Like Gerard Mayo will go on the Greg Hill show, like you mentioned, Scott, and guess what? Both stations and national, columnists will run with stories from things he's saying on the station. It creates talking points for the rest of the day and possibly the week. The Bruins sit here and they just, they go silent. But in any event, so when's the Bruins' next game? Is it Wednesday night?
Thursday.
So when would we like to record next so that the listeners can plan ahead?
I have nothing Friday, believe it or not, so I can.
I was gonna say probably I guess this will just be a 2-episode week, probably our usual Friday episode.
Alrighty. Well, in that case, thank you all very much for listening.
Unless something happens.
Unless something happens.
I was gonna say that there could be an emergency pod any day now.
Mm-hmm.
Unless something happens, and I have seen people continuing to send questions, acknowledging that mailbags aren't always a thing, but we obviously didn't get to much today for listener questions, but always send. We can always do that.
I was gonna say that there are a few I'd like to get to Friday, for sure, that we just didn't have time to get to today.
All right. So 2-episode week this week. Next week, we'll get the holiday, so I won't make any promises, but generally speaking, 3 episodes per week. But thank you all very much for listening, and we'll talk to you on Friday. Hey guys, thanks for watching this Skate Podcast. If you want to see more of our videos, visit our playlist.
Not in front of a screen? You can listen to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Don't forget to follow us on social media. And if you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to give us a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel, and leave a comment.